Welcome, everybody, to Tritype Relationships Q&A with me, Spencer, and my mom, Katherine. If you can just quickly note how we've entered our names. If you haven't already, I'm seeing that basically all of you have. If you could just make sure to change it to your first name and then your abbreviation for your first subtype / the secondary subtype, your tritype, and then your Myers-Briggs. Keeping them lowercase, preferably so your tritype stands out. And then if you end up wanting to ask any questions, we just ask that during the time that you ask questions that your video is on. Makes it easier to track who's talking and things like that. But if you're not currently asking a question, your video doesn't need to be on. It's completely up to you. And then we will be teaching for about an hour. But if you want to know about your personal tritype, we'll be taking on about 2 people today. That's pretty much it. And since there are always new people, I'm just going to quickly read a quick description of tritype, which of course you can also find at enneagramtritypetests.com as well as katherinefauvre.com. So Tritype, a 27-point personality system coined and created by Katherine Chernick, is based on the theory that an individual uses 3 Enneagram types, not just one. These 3 types occur as one in each of the 3 centers of intelligence: the head, which is 5, 6, 7, heart, which is 2, 3, 4, and gut, which is 8, 9, 1. And are used in a preferred continuously oscillating descending and stacking order, which create a new type unto itself with a more specific worldview, coping mechanisms, and defense strategies. The Enneagram type at the top of your tritype stacking is your dominant or core Enneagram type.
Excellent. We're going to begin with the questions we've already been asked. Some we didn't get to last time, and some are quite similar from before. And if you have a question that we want to address in a future class, just be sure and send that question via info@katherinefauvre.com. All right. So the first thing is, like, people ask, what is tritype? Spencer's answered that. Basically, for those of you who don't know, I've spent the last 39 years working with the Enneagram and certifying with all the initial schools and done research. That's how I know a lot of the nuances of the type that were then later validated when I attended intensives with Naranjo and Echazo. In fact, for those of you who don't know, Naranjo validated my subtype findings. So it was pretty meaningful that people in the research on the internal experience of type said things that Naranjo had hypothesized but had not voiced. So it was very confluent. And that's what you'll find with the Enneagram in general. If something is meaningful and true, it will show up in more than one location. Other people will think of it. And it's wonderfully confluent if you always consider something applying to each center and to the 3 instincts, just as a rule of thumb. Okay, the first question is, what do you mean when you say a person needs to have the idealized image, core fears, and defense strategy of the types in the tritype to be that tritype? And then a second question to that is, how can you tell? Well, what this person is addressing is that I often comment in different places that in order to have a particular type in your tritype, we must see the idealized image, but you also must identify with the core fears and demonstrate them. So identify is just the beginning, but if you don't demonstrate those fears, then it's possible that that isn't the type of that center in your tritype, or You might have the right tritype, but have the order a little off. And then what do I mean by the defense strategy? Well, we can relate to other types, but if we use a defense strategy of a different type, that's the lead. So a lot of times people that are 6s and 9s will struggle because they naturally are tracking behaviors. And in the case of the defense strategy of 6 and 9, it can be elusive, but it can be observed by someone else. And as someone begins to learn how to work with it and the Enneagram from this perspective, it really helps identify your actual types in the tritype, and it's life altering. So by that, Spencer and I will go through it, but before I begin saying more about that, Spencer, tell them your background.
I am a licensed marriage and family therapist that utilizes Enneagram Tritype in every single session that I engage in. And I've been doing this for almost a decade. And also I am very well versed in Tritype, as it's literally been a secondary language that I've grown up with alongside of English for my whole entire life. So I know about this more than I even know about being a therapist.
Yeah, that's true. So let's give an example, a hypothetical one, Spencer. Let's use your tritype and how you have the idealized image as an 8 of being powerful, and you fear being disempowered as an 8. You also have the 4 and the 6. So the secondary issues are the 4's fear of being inadequate and the 6's fear of not knowing what they should to be safe. And so the fear ends up being a fear of fear itself, which is why 6s don't recognize their 6s, because they try to manage what causes them to feel fear. And because they're prepared, they no longer realize that their defense strategy is to do everything to avoid feeling fear. So as a 8, 4, 6, how do you experience that? Those 3 types, and the defense strategies, of course, included.
Yeah, I always joke that you can often find me floating down the river of denial. It's a go-to response for me. Quite literally, this isn't even happening. I'll forget that something's going on. When I talk to someone who doesn't have 8 in their tritype, they will almost be shocked, if not literally shocked. Like, wait, what do you mean? Like that you forgot about, you weren't even thinking about it? It's like, no, like it's like poof, gone. It allows me to maintain the strong presence that I want to be able to present. That way I don't lose the ability to be there for others. I want someone to know that I'm strong enough for them to lean on me. And if I'm showing that I'm stressed or that there's, some sort of vulnerability in the armor, then maybe I'm not that protective source that I want to be viewed as. And the 4, I definitely don't want to come off as inadequate. I want to be seen as not just like, I mean, for lack of a better phrasing, like I kind of want to come off as impressive. I want to come off as, unique. And like, there's like, I want to be noticed for like, oh, you do that in this way. There's something really special about the way that I'm doing something that I like being noticed in that way. It's like, oh, like, like I can be a therapist, but like, I'm the only therapist I know that does Tritype, like things like that. And feeling like I'm not good enough, that I am somehow falling short, is a huge fear. And I definitely use my 8 to mask that I'm even concerned about that. It took my wife a long time to even recognize that I had 6 in my tritype, because she didn't see me presenting the looping thoughts that the 6 has, because again, that would look like vulnerability, weakness, like that I was questioning myself, all these things that directly go against my primary number. So even though all of these things happen, I'll even notice that like my 6 will really, really highlight in like an 8 way. Like I really start looping if I haven't heard from my wife by the time I'm supposed to. Now all of a sudden I'm wondering, is she in a ditch somewhere? But my protectiveness comes in like, oh gosh, am I not there when she needs me? But unless that's happening, I try not to even think about it. So I really notice that I kind of do things like quite literally in order. First I go into denial and then. So it's very, very accurate. I think that's why that it's so important, that first question you discussed, because you got to show the things.
The 8 has the denial, trying to not be disempowered. So shutting off the memories of it. So we don't feel the disempowerment, because you're right. We can't move forward and handle whatever we need to handle if we're trapped in emotion or slowed down in a way by emotion. And then the 4 has the defense strategy of interjection. Can you say how you experience that with the 4 in your Tritype?
I mean, I'm just really, really hard on myself, and I'm always self-evaluating, and and it's good versions. It's me trying to grow and be more emotionally advanced and emotionally growing, emotionally aware. It's just really important to me that I really understand myself, but I can just really use that in a negative way where I kind of notice something I didn't do, or I can really just, I don't know, the parts that I hope are unique or special or cool about me, I won't label them as such. And it's really self-deprecating. And it's an unfortunate thing because it clashes with how I want to present. So it's interesting how I can present so confident, because I am very confident, but at the same time, all it takes is one even kind of misunderstanding implied by someone else, and then instantly I will then start self-assessing about that area. And then of course, when it teams up with the 6, it's just like even worse. I always say the 4 emotionally loops and the 6 mentally loops. So it's just like,
Yeah, and interjection, the way Naranjo modified it, because there are defense mechanisms, but when we say defense strategy, it's based on what I learned from Naranjo as to how he modified the mechanisms. So you might read descriptions of the defense mechanisms and say, okay, that seems like a type, but why is that the particular one chosen? And Naranjo actually did modify it. And that's the difference when we say defense strategies. But with interjection, as he saw it, you don't need to have the person in front of you saying something wonderful or negative about you. Interjection, you always hold both. So if there's anything in your environment, or you even observe 2 people talking to one another, and there's something that reminds you of a wonderful feeling, you feel it within yourself based on your own life experience. But if you observe someone talking in a critical way, if you have 4 in the Tritype, you will immediately go into an interject of someone that talked to you that way. Now, what's important is you feel the emotion as though it's new.
Yep.
And other people can have interjection, but they're not necessarily re-experiencing the event here and now. So I definitely know that as your mother, but what would you say about that?
Well, coming from the therapeutic lens, I would really highly correlate it with like PTSD, where like it sends me right back to that moment. It feels very real. And honestly, I can really struggle to tell the difference between what I'm feeling and what I'm picking up in the other. So I end up feeling double. So I'm feeling very reactive, very emotional in the moment. It's wonderful when it's a good thing, right?
Yes.
I can be really happy for someone else, and I can be in that happiness with them. And I use that tool all the time in my work. It's very, very validating, and it's a wonderful tool to help people really feel seen, because I can literally feel it with you. But if I internalize something that I'm seeing between two people, not even directed towards me, like you mentioned, or if it's happening towards me, if something's happening, I can't tell if I'm like projecting and then therefore identifying with that projection. If I'm picking up on what they're talking, if it's my own feelings, it gets all muddied.
Yeah, 6 has projection. Yeah, so that you're an interesting mix of interjection and
Bing,
projection.
bing, 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 bing. Yeah.
And it's really helpful to understand that. And as we go, we'll say more about this, but to use this example, why someone uses their defense strategy is to maintain their idealized self-image. So back to the very first question, why do I talk about the importance of that? Is that we all get triggered if our idealized image is questioned in any way, because it's how we survive in the world. It's how we hold our ego together. And so the superego message is coming from the idealized images together. And whatever the types share in common becomes of the utmost importance. So the 468 is especially good at immediacy of seeing what's going on, what's potentially a threat, what needs to be protected, what needs to be defended, and what needs to be called off. So that's why the Tritype maintains that focus. Now, the other thing with the 4 is that this idealized image is I am authentic. So sometimes I'll work with people that they've read a lot about type 4, and unfortunately, most of the negative parts of type 4, actually all 9 types, are up on these different sites, social media sites, that if someone happens to have a tritype that's more confident and more mature, they won't recognize themselves in those descriptions. But if I do the inquiry process, it will move down to the worst thing that can happen is to not be authentic to your feelings, your true sense of authenticity. Now, 8s want to be an individual and authentic, but with 4, it's totally disruptive if they feel inadequate against that authenticity. So people that are 4s that maybe have 7 and 8, so it presents as a more confident 4, they won't recognize themselves because of the negativity that's been written. But that, as I said, that's true of all the types. We have to modify what was overly emphasized. What would I say too is with the 6, it's this image of being friendly, engaging, interpersonal in a kind of mental way. And then whether you're sexual or social or self-pres influences it. What would you want to add to that, Spencer?
I mean, if we're speaking solely from like the 468, it's the authenticity, I think, is triple magnified, because the 6 wants to be honest, the 4 wants to be authentic, and the 8 wants to be real. So I've been told once or twice that I'm too honest, which I didn't even know was a thing. I don't know how you can be too honest. You just say what's honestly on your mind. But I learned that I was surpassing what is socially expected to be said in certain moments. So that desire to really present oneself, especially with this tritype, is I've noticed to be really, really high. And I've found that in clients who share that tritype. Whereas when you start mixing with other numbers, it starts shifting a little bit.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, any person that has 4 and 8 in their tritype wants to be authentic, but then the head type determines how you're going to assert that and how you're going to demonstrate it in a way. So the 4, 7, 8 also cares and they think they're authentic, but if they come on too strong, they're going to try to get around things. They're going to use the defense strategy of the 7 and reframe it and come off a little lighter to lighten up this need for absolute authenticity. And 4, 5, 8 is going to do it with their information and knowledge. And all three will be quick, very fast to say their truth, so to speak. But that's having 4 and 8 in the Tritype. But the 6 in there makes it the most immediate.
Mhm.
And then the 4, 5, 8 will do it intellectually, and the 4, 7, 8 will try to adjust and not be as severe in a way. So sometimes they won't seem like an 8, and the 4, 5, 8 can seem like an 8, and the 4, 6, 8, even if they're not an 8, they will seem 8-ish because of that quick reactivity. And the other thing is how they're modified. Like each type, depending on their Tritype, qualities will be amplified or minimized depending on which types are in the Tritype. So if you have the 4 and 8, you're always going to be intense. It's just what kind of intense will depend on your head type. And each Enneagram type shares something in common with every other Enneagram type, and something exactly the opposite of every other Enneagram type. So when you're looking at what happens with Tritype, it's the tripling effect of a value. And that will be the more specific focus that Tritype offers, and why I say it creates a new type unto itself. So the next question is like, what is the purpose of Tritype? Because some people have questioned it and they feel like it's distracting. Well, what I would say is if people don't want to do the work, they might just say, well, that's this part of my defense strategy or my Tritype, this type. Yeah, but people will do that with any system. Having said that, if you don't have the opportunity to go deeper and identify the 3 types in your Tritype, how you use your head center, how you use your heart center, and how you use your gut center, you're also missing out on the defense strategies you use, on the holy ideas, the holy virtues and holy actions, or the divine qualities of the types. So the elevated way, you're missing out on the more primitive expressions of the 3 types. Yes, your core type remains the same, but if you lead with your gut, you're going to be a gut type, but you still have a head type and a heart type. And it's unbelievably helpful to do deeper work. So sometimes when people say, oh, it's shallow, it's actually just the opposite. And the other misconception is people think that it's really hard to learn. Well, if there's 3, then how do you do it? It's easier. The brain does not want to work with one answer to 9 variables. It's much easier for the brain to group things in 3s and make a decision. And then once you get to what someone identifies with, their potential Tritype, then you can see if they have the defense strategy and the idealized image and the core fears that go with that. If I just try to have people choose a type, they don't want to claim one. People will be resistant, and we lose the people that say, oh yeah, I heard about the Enneagram. Yeah, that's just too complicated. It's really not if it's broken down into parts, and then you confirm it. Is there anything you would add to that in terms of the purpose, Spencer? I mean, there's a lot of ways it helps, but
Okay. Well, honestly, I could go the whole rest of the time just on that alone. But if I were to keep it short, anything that I've really run into, I'll keep it in my profession, for example. We don't just give diagnoses, we give diagnoses with qualifiers. It makes it more specific. You don't just have like adjustment disorder. You have adjustment disorder with anxious presentation or depressive presentation or mixed presentation. It makes it more specific. Also, if you're just going off of one type, there's 9 options. There's so many people in this world that are like, how do you fit me in a box of 9? Well, if you go off of Tritype, there's 27, but then you also have to remember that you can show up in 6 different orientations of every single Tritype, which actually makes you 1 in 162. So now we're getting way more specific. Then you throw in your subtype stacking, which again, there's 6 different options. So let's do the math again, 972. So it just keeps going, not to mention you have a dominant wing, and then so that's multiplied by 2. So now we're in the, close to 2000 range. So it gets really, really specific. So to have me just go off of 8 would have been very inaccurate. The classic 8, the bull in the china shop, as they say, the you-know-what buster, as they say, I don't fully identify with that. The 6 makes me softer, and the 4 makes me much more desiring to emotionally express myself compared to maybe 8 with 3. So I wouldn't have identified nearly as much, nor would I understand myself nearly as much. As funny as it may sound, even when my wife and I are having anywhere from a medium to an intense discussion, maybe even a conflict, we will discuss our numbers as we're doing it to better understand what's happening. So it even simplifies communication if it's not used to harm each other. So I've never, if I can be so frank, I've never understood how someone could say it actually makes it easier to just focus on 1 of 9, because it leaves out way too much information, in my opinion.
Yeah. And so once you have a way to confirm your Tritype, then it's like a magic key. It's like a triple key that creates a master key.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's right. You factor in the instincts, and the instincts are the triggering element that is making this understandable. We'll take the questions after we finish this part of the written questions. But I know it seems overwhelming, but it doesn't seem overwhelming once you understand your own Tritype.
Yeah.
Then I will also add in MBTI, because that's the process that someone's going to use. The style, the approach to handling the trigger from the instinct that then is kind of notifying the Tritype, and we're going to go about handling it according to that. And then the Myers-Briggs type is, how are you going to do it? Are you going to do it with details and absolute consecutive order to things? Do you need completion? And do you do it in an impersonal way without involving your emotions? That's more ISTJ. Now, are there particular groupings? Absolutely. And I will talk more about that in an interview with Alicio David. This leads right into a lot of these questions, actually. People always have questions about the special notices. I'll come back to that. But there's one that's really important. And it was a question, are there examples when you can get the 6 special notice and not have 6 in the Tritype? Yes, there are. Now, are they infrequent? Absolutely. So if you received a special notice, it's telling you that you are using a pattern that 6s and 9s use. And if you're getting a lot of the 6 messages, then you're doing things in a way that are consistently inconsistent. Whereas the 9 is inconsistent, but they're not as consistent in the way they're inconsistent, if that makes sense. It's more random. So
inconsistently inconsistent.
Yeah. Inconsistently inconsistent. Yeah. And so they might, in the top choices, every time I gave 3 cards to rank or sentences to rank, the 6 might rank one over the other, and then it shows up later because of their choices, and then they rank it the reverse. Whereas the 9, it'll be sometimes it's this, sometimes it's that. And what's important is they're meant to do that. It's not the 6 and 9 aren't as capable or competent. The 6 is meant to conceal their insecurities. They're not going to reveal their type. And people trash 6s. They trash every type. So why would you want to expose something where people are going to project all over you? And who worries about that the most? The type that uses the defense strategy of projection, which is the 6. And the 9, it's more that they have this wonderful ability to identify with all the types. As a result, they can do that. I can do that too. Sometimes I do that. And that's why they change answers. Whereas the 6 might also say, wait a minute, who's seeing this test? And they want to trick the test or test the test. So they'll give different answers is one thing that'll happen. Another thing that can happen if the 6 is really trying hard to answer the test accurately,
Depends.
they might have been told they're a 1. So they'll choose the 1 cards to be loyal to the person who said they were a 1. And then when I ask them, well, why did you choose the 1 card when you've just used all the 6 cards? They'll say, oh, well, because someone told me I was a 1, and someone they like or respect. It wouldn't just be anybody. And then I say, okay, compare the adjectives now and tell me what's true. And then they'll say, well, it's actually 6. So that's part of the projection again, the projecting that to be included, to be safe, and to feel like you know what's important to survive. You're going to go with the person you respect most. And yet, at the same time, they will ask a lot of people, well, how do you see me? Or as I would maybe ask 2 people if I was learning the system. I'm not going to ask everyone what they think. And 6s will also say, well, what would you do in this situation? It doesn't mean they're going to do what you say, but it's data, additional data points as a mental type. Now, what a lot of people don't know, because I don't stress it as much, is that 3s have just as much trouble typing. The only reason they know they're a 3 is all the keywords for type 3 fit what they're focused on. Having said that, other people can type like a 3 and not be a 3 if they've been focused on success their whole lives. And socials might want to be successful, or parenting might say you've got to be successful. So back to the original question is like, how do you know the difference? And how do you determine what is important? And that is, when you're taking the test, understand that at the very beginning of the test, I gave you 3 cards for each Enneagram type. You put them in the order of your own ranking. So you then determined how you were served the cards. So people don't realize how individualized it is. So I might come out as an 8-7-4, and someone else might be an 8-7-4. But did we choose the same 3 cards? No, that's another variable that is made available through this testing instrument. And I did that all deliberately because we have these identifications. So are there special notices that you might receive and not be that type? Yeah, there are particular examples. If you have 6 or 9 in your Tritype, you might get that message. You might be a 9. And if you have 6, it will just confirm it. But you might be a 9 that doesn't have 6, but you might still get the messages because of the inconsistency in a particular way. It's not just any inconsistency. There are many factors that go into it. It's not a single thing you can do or not do. The other thing is, if you are 6, you could get that message for sure, because you identify with the stronger type in your tritype than the 6, because you're just not even seeing the 6 at all. The other example where 6 could show up is if someone's an extremely self-pres person. In other words, they have self-pres really high and the other instincts are low, both the others. So if you are self-pres in such a way that you run a lot of fear, you might relate to some of the pictures on the test. So that is an exception. Then in a lesser way, if you have a very strong wing you identify with. So if you're a 7 or a 5 and you've experienced a lot of fear or trauma in your life, you're going to choose the 6 card in one particular place that doesn't mean you're a 6, but your choices wouldn't be right for you. So you end up with the 6 card, but you're comfortable doing so because you know the fear you experienced as a child. So we could say that's part of a kind of residue of PTSD. So when people say, do I have a different type because of experiencing trauma? The answer is no. But do you identify with a different type because of trauma? Absolutely, that can happen. So if you see those messages, and depending on how many messages you have, it just means there's something very important to still learn about your particular tritype and your identifications. And that's what we want to sort. So what I do is I have the sentences as well to see which sentences you stack in what order according to the centers, and then the core fears and idealized images. So looking at everything overall is meaningful. And if you're really, really honest about the words you would use at the very beginning of the test, it reveals so much more. But since most people don't know how their test results are going to be used, they don't want to give their actual words. And I'm saying I never, ever share someone's name, even in my research. The only thing would be is if I noticed a particular pattern and I just happened to be scanning through the test, I might notify you if I see a very special pattern. And I might say, oh, you might identify with this type, but you really might want to look at this tritype. So sometimes people are surprised when they get an email from me. But it's just that I've noticed a very important pattern. But otherwise, I always ask for permission. And you never have to worry that I'm using the test in any way other than looking up a client when the client needs it, or if you can't find your test results. But people wouldn't know that. So the inclination is to come up with a different word or a better word. And I encourage you, if you tried to have the right words, take the test again and be more first gut impression as to what word you would use. And it may not change your outcome, but it will change your understanding of your outcome. You might see words that show a need for accuracy, a need for independence, a need for autonomy, a need for confidence. So if you're really honest, it gives you a lot of data to compare against your results. Does that make sense? Okay, so here's another one that's asked quite a bit, and I've always identified with 2, but the descriptions of type 2 just seem too passive. I think I have the 268 tritype. Could my tritype be the reason that I don't relate to the description of type 2? I'm going to have Spencer go into more about this, but I must tell you, for those of you who don't know, a whole chunk of type 2 was put into type 7 and type 8 and type 9. So the 2 was one of the types that was not fully disseminated. And type 2 is a very strong type. They are not passive, but in their attempt to be attentive, to get the mirroring from you, they can seem softer, but they're very persistent at trying to get the outcome that they want. And every single type manipulates. So that's another way that 2s are trashed, is the word manipulation. In fact, just to look at things recently, like, why is everyone so against the word manipulation? We all manipulate. It's because it's all related to narcissism now. And there's such a rise in people wanting to understand narcissism or suffering at the hands of a narcissist. By the way, that getting to that actual determination is a lot more than what people think, because people can be self-centered and not narcissistic. But having said that, as a result, they're talking about the malignant narcissist that manipulates. But we all manipulate no matter what our Enneagram type is. We're trying to have our needs met, and we're doing something to manipulate according to our defense strategy. So Spencer, what would you say about like the 2s that you've worked with this passive and this aggressive quality? Oh, before I do that, I realize that when I describe a type, I don't go into the dark side of a type. And why don't I? Because there's no explanation with it. And in writing, people project all over it. They use it to wound one another. So I will explain it like this when I have the opportunity to say things like, yep, we all manipulate. How do you manipulate? And so, yes, the 2s, hey, if I need attentive care, like after surgery or in a situation where I need that extra support, boy, someone with 2 in the tritype is extraordinary because they're naturally attending to that. But can a 2 be unhealthy and give you what you don't need so they get the feeling they need of value? Yes. So Spencer, what's your experience with 2s?
Well, first of all, I'm really glad you brought up the word manipulation. There's unfortunately a negative stigma attached, a negative connotation attached to that word. This comes up a lot in my work. Manipulation is actually a neutral term. The negative version of manipulation is actually coercion. And the more positive version of manipulation, it would be influence. Manipulation is simply getting someone to think, feel, or do something without directly saying, feel this, think this, do this. If I want you to feel good about yourself, I don't say, feel good about yourself. I say, oh, I like that shirt on you. I just manipulated you. I could literally say in my therapeutic work, I manipulate every single one of my clients every single day. Because I'm not saying, I think this is what's happening. I'll be like, why do you think that's going on? And I actually lead them down a path where they answer the question that I'm assuming is the answer, but I don't want to just be like, that's what it is. Because I also, of course, could be wrong. But manipulation is not a negative thing. We manipulate all the time. It's not a negative thing unless we have negative intentions with it.
Yes.
So it's really important to understand that. And when it comes to the 2, I find 2s to be direct. It's just not that. I mean, if they're in a more wounded place, it will maybe fit the more classic, like, because I think when people think of like, passive versus aggressive, it's like very black and white descriptions, right? Passive is like, oh no, it's okay, it's fine, And then aggressive is like, hey, But twos are nudgers. Nudge, 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 nudge. Hey, hey. It's more of a gentle, but they're very persistent because it's important to still maintain, hey, I want to still connect to that idealized image of being compassionate and a good person and caring. And what kind of person would I be if I become demanding? So, not to mention that one of the biggest fears for a two is to become a burden. So they are direct. It's not like maybe like how an eight would, or something like that, but they can, because there's a line of connection to eight, by the way. Twos can be real feisty and they can come off that way. So it's really understanding that they absolutely, it just depends what's going on. And if they feel like they have not been validated or seen or matched, every two I've come across doesn't even need the relationship to be 50-50. But when they start recognizing over time, the math is not mathing, as they say, where it's like, I always do this kind of thing for you. And I'm really starting to recognize, because they're not keeping track as it's happening, because it feels good to self-sacrifice. It's a way of showing love. It's a way of showing care and respect. But when they start going through revisionist history and recognizing, wait, what? Then they really get hurt, because then that usually brings up lifetime wounding of feeling like a doormat and feeling unimportant and feeling unseen. And, it's like, oh, I take care of people, but people don't take care of me, even though there is a system where they don't press that. Again, not to be a burden, so that there's a looping element there. But if you pay attention, the two is absolutely being direct. They're just not being abrasive at first. It's more kind and considerate, and what they'd be proud of, reflecting back and being like, I handled it this way. I'm really glad that I handled it this way. So I don't see them as passive. It's really just like we said when we described the tritype as a whole, it's when you put them all together. A 2, 6, 8. Yeah, that's a forward too. Absolutely.
Very feisty too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you got the reactivity, you got the needing to come off, big and strong, and not weak. And at the same time, that there's that two conflict with the 8 in that moment of like, it's like, I need to let you know that my needs need to be met, but at the same time, not wanting to be a burden is a horrible inner conflict. And the 6 just chimes in being like, well, yeah, but if you do this, this bad thing can happen. If you don't do this, this bad thing can happen, because they just go back and forth. So no, 2, 6, 8 absolutely can be direct. Switch that with a 9, and maybe that is a little closer to what people think when they're describing this passive 2. But even that, it's not. They're just they're kind of finding a way to maneuver to get their needs in a way that doesn't create conflict, doesn't create chaos, doesn't create any kind of conflict with self-perception, anything like that. But yeah, they want to get their needs met like anyone else.
Spencer, you're reminding about something important too. If not enough people realize they're 2s, instead they might think they're an 8 or a 7 or a 9, but in particular, it'll be the 7 and 8. If they're assertive, they'll think they're an 8. If they are really kind of identified with their hedonism or their enjoyment of pleasure seeking, then they'll think they're a 7. And they can be quite funny. And then if they do have the 9 in the tritype, they might think they're a 9. Oh yeah, I just want to do what you want. But then, because I've had a lot of this tritype that I've worked with over the years as assistants, especially when I was in an executive where they were changing within every 2 years, they would say, oh yeah, whatever you want. And then they do something else. And why would they do something else? It wasn't just to frustrate me. They thought it would be better. And so what's disowned is they've changed something without a conversation. And that is an asserting without claiming the assertion. But usually they're trying to make it a surprise, so they're especially appreciated. Or if they're unaware, it might be that they want it the other way. Or someone could say, oh yeah, I just do what my friend wants, but I really think she should do this. Or what they might do instead is say, are you sure you want to do that? Like, I don't know, aren't you worried about this? So they raise an issue that would make people think twice. So that's still directing where it goes. But I encourage people that didn't think that they were as definite and neutral in the nonchalant, direct response to consider the possibility that they could be a 2. Or if they're an emotional 7, that's an oxymoron. 7s aren't emotional. They're in the mind. They're leading with their thoughts, not trying to get people to be in sync with them emotionally. The other thing is that if you look at the descriptions of the 3 instincts, they're not mild-mannered responses like conquest, aggression, assault, and manipulation. Now, in 1971, those weren't the terrible words they're considered now with the movement of addressing malignant narcissism. So that was just like, oh, okay, yeah, I do that. And the definition of a 2 to recognize it was the flattery. And really, it's rapport seeking. So the 2 says something nice because it creates instant rapport with someone. People go, oh, thank you. They feel good about themselves. The 2 feels good about themselves for uplifting the spirits of someone else. And it makes it very easy to have a conversation. So that's important. And then if you look at like the holy ideas and the holy virtues and the fixation and the passion, they're not mild-mannered. None of the types are. That's when we're a mess. But when we're coming from our more elevated, the higher expression of our type, it's pretty extraordinary for all the types. So you might see freedom for the 2 and not know what it means. And that means you really don't understand type 2 because it wasn't disseminated. Because type 2 is pushing for their way, and they want the independence and the autonomy for people to follow their lead. But if that doesn't happen, they're going to try and navigate it in a way that everyone wants to do what they're suggesting. So they want the freedom to do what they want, but they want you to come along with them. Other types might want the companionship, like the 7 in contrast. But if you don't want to come along, the 7's going to still go find another friend, someone else to share the experience with. Whereas the 2 keeps trying to get their desired other or others to do it together. So a lot of times we will focus on the types that were not fully disseminated. And I just hope more people realize there are 2. So they are one of the examples, though, if they have 6 and 9 in the tritype rather than the 8, that helps them understand that it's like double 8, 8 in the line of connection, 8 in the tritype, and 6 becomes counterphobic whenever there's an 8, and sometimes with a type 1, then they understand, oh, okay, that's why I'm more assertive than those descriptions. I'm not as weak as the descriptions of 2. And I really noticed this, by the way, when I was typing people as exemplars. And do I know absolutely that the historical figure or the celebrity is any particular type? No. But can I make an educated guess because of all the systems I know? Yeah, I can. But can I still be wrong occasionally? Sure. But if we look at something or someone like Napoleon, people that just learn the Enneagram think he's an 8 or was an 8. No, it was all about, an emotional expression. It was a 2 with 8 in the Tritype. And that's what you want to look for, is the emotions, because when 8s are triggered, they get flat. They don't start yelling and screaming unless you've gotten right in their face and you threaten them. But otherwise, the 8 goes, wait a minute. Are you saying? And they get calmer and calmer and stonier. Whereas the 2 gets more animated, the 6 gets more animated. And that's hard to write in a book. So it's not that people have not known it. It was just lost in the dissemination of the Enneagram. And it's hard to describe. We kind of covered the 638 and the 836, but Spencer, this question is, how do you work with a client that thinks they're an 836, but you can tell they're a 638? This is coming from a therapist.
So the question is how to help them understand that their tritype is in a different order.
Yes. And person also added that they don't want to be the 6 at all. So how do you work with them as a therapist if they won't allow the idea that they could be a 6? And I think this is where Tritype really helps, doesn't it? Because you're working with the 3 types. It doesn't matter which is in charge. Tend to what a client needs, but ultimately you want to help them see it. What do you do?
I get away from the numbers and I start asking about thinking, feeling, and acting. If your head type is first, you'll think first. If your gut type is first, you'll act first. If your heart type is first, you will feel first. So I will just simply ask, what lens are you coming from? Are you like, tell me what you're doing. And it's like, well, I'm thinking this and thinking that. And I start hearing a lot of thinking stuff. It's like, okay, so your head type is first. Keep in mind, in the end, you put these 3 numbers together, it's going to have this descriptor. It's just understanding that this is the base point that you start from. And also, I make sure to re-educate, because you nailed it earlier. The descriptors of 6 are negative. I mean, a lot of numbers are. Personally, I love to change worrier to preparer, right? Like when you're trying to, I was working with a couple where the primary number was 6, the other one was 7. And I helped them understand that when the 7 was trying to come up with all these ideas and do all these things, the 6 partner wasn't poking holes in the plan to prevent it from happening. The 6 partner was actually trying to make sure that the 7 didn't fall from the clouds and hit hard because they hadn't thought of this and hadn't thought of that. They're really actually just trying to make sure that what they're planning actually does happen. So they ask the questions that they don't know if the other person asked. They're just trying to prepare. They're just thinking things through. That's it. So it's really just understanding that they're also incredibly loyal and they're playful and they can have a little bit of a dark sense of humor, especially when they're paired with 8. And it's understanding there's a lot more to it than just like Chucky from Rugrats. Like it's this really extreme descriptor that's very invalidating and only talks about very specific scenarios for very specific people. So, and I think you've even said this, that 6s can come off more like an 8 than an 8 can in terms of that typical descriptor.
Yeah, the 638 or 683 perfectly matches the incomplete stereotype description that was disseminated because of the notes taken by Robert Oakes in Naranjo's class. So there's a whole group of us that got that kind of definition of 8, but actually it's the 638 can seem like an 8. I can never ever get a 6 or a 3 that has the 368 tritype to see they're leading with 3 or 6 rather than 8. I have to weave them into it, not unlike what you're doing. I have to help them clarify their idealized images and their core fears. And I have to do the in-depth inquiry to get to those and the actual defense strategy that they use and the order they use them. but they don't know what the defense strategies are. I have to define them and help them see it. And doing the inquiry process, they're going to be revealing that. And then they say, oh, but I don't blame them because they fit the description to the T. But it's the incomplete description of 8. And just like when people say, oh, that person's an 8 because they're a bully. No, any type can bully. How do they bully? Why are they bullying? What strategy of bullying are they using? When do they bully? Just like anyone's manipulating, anyone can be angry, anyone can be smart, anyone can be introverted. So all these things are important, and we can't type based on a stereotype. But yes, Spencer, I totally agree. And that falls right into another similar question from a coach. Why do some people think their tritype has changed? And even if I try to explain to them that it doesn't, what can I say? And I'll be interested to see if you add more to this, Spencer, but for me, they haven't found their correct tritype yet, or they're basing their earlier tritype and their current tritype based on behaviors, because type and tritype don't change. Our attitudes, our health, our emotional maturity, our understanding changes, but not the defense strategies, because we're actually born with them, which was not known or clarified till brain science made it very clear that a lot of personality is nature after all. It was all thought to be what we were born with years ago. And then in the 60s, they were looking at nurture, but then they went too far the other way and everything was nurture because of twin studies where identical twins that were separated would have similarities, but then differences. So what we discovered over time, those of us that have been teaching the Enneagram a long time and doing research, is it's both. You're born with that focus, but whether or not your family understood your type and supported how you were different than the parent, even if you're the same Enneagram type, you could be different. But the more you had in common, the more the parent would be permissive because it would be like them. And yet a healthy parent accepts you even if you're totally different. Like if you're an introvert and you'd rather stay inside on your own and read books or research something that you're interested in, and you have a parent that's an extrovert and social and wants to go and do and thinks, no, you need to be doing that. If you can't accept your child as different from you, that's where the identifications come in and the psychological acceptance of the self can be impacted. But that can be restored with time too. But we're born with what we're going to pay attention to. Anything you would add to that, Spencer?
I think you really nailed it, the behavior part, honestly. If we lose track of the fact that our tritype is what it is because of our core motivations, I'm still motivated in the same way that I was as a child. I just go about achieving those motivations in a hopefully more healthy way than I once did. But obviously we can also digress. So that can change. I've run across, nines who are like, oh, well, I'm much more forward than I used to be. I wonder if I'm this now, things like that. It's like, no, nines can be forward. It's any number can behave any way. What pushes them to, allows them to, what growth they went through, whatever, that's the difference maker. So really, I actually strongly push against the mindset of my tritype is changing, not only because it's inaccurate, but I also think it takes away from the effort you've put into growing yourself. Like it really, by actually, no, I'm actually the same tritype. I've just grown and I do things differently is way more validating and powerful than to be like, oh, my tritype changed. It's almost like something came along and just made you different, not because you did anything to make it so. So I think it's unintentionally disempowering whether the person realizes it or not.
And something I would add to that, if someone goes through extreme stressors and painful experiences, they can become more hyper aware of things or worried about things. Like if a self-pres has a health concern, they may become hyper focused and think that they're a different type, like that they might identify with a 6 suddenly and not be a 6. So they're surprised when they do a session with me because everyone expects me to say, oh, no, actually, you're a 6. But it's just because I set up the task to alert people if they needed to understand more about their answers. And as I said, if it shows up, it's usually 6 or 9. But sometimes people have just gone through such stress that they're preoccupied and they see their paranoia. And then they think, well, was I 6 all along and just didn't know it? Am I one of those people? But if I do the inquiry process, I'll say, no, because you don't have the defense strategy of the 6. You actually have the defense strategy of a 4 that feels extremely inadequate, where you were considered a prodigy when you were a child. So those things can happen too. Person might not have 6 in their tritype at all, but any of us can go into paranoia if we had to face something that's very, very extreme. So I'm not taking away from how many people that are 6s that don't recognize it, but this is that trauma factor where your tritype doesn't change, but stress and trauma can make it seem like it changed. And as Spencer said, if you become self-aware, like as an 8, I used to think the greatest, gift I could give someone, the greatest form of respect, was to tell them the truth. But I didn't realize that for some people that was threatening, and they were waiting for something more to happen that would be problematic. And like when people would get to know me, especially if they met me when I was in charge of handling an event or whatever, I would just be so simple and direct. I wasn't mean, but I would not couch things. Oh, would you please do this? I'd say, okay, you need to move that there. And yeah, okay, John, put that there. It's just like directive that people thought, whoa, what's going to happen next? But I learned with many of the typologies to say, oh, by the way, when we're actually executing this event, I will be direct. It's not personal. It's just efficient. It's to get things done so then we can go relax before the event starts or enjoy one another. And they go, oh, okay. So I've learned to do that. Whereas before I'd just be, okay. One time I was in Atlanta and they said, slow down, honey. We'll be with you at the end of your sentence. And I thought, oh, I think they're giving me one of those messages. I go, am I coming too strong? They said, we want to take a break now. And I said, oh, okay. Yeah, I was just trying to be considerate of the people in this department and that department and coordinating everybody so no one is treated with disrespect. And they said, no one will feel that way here. So it's listening to your impact and realizing you may not intend the impact of your type, but it's there. But just learning the Enneagram and that 8s come on too strong in an innocent way because we're just too direct without couching anything, then it's work and a sign of growth if you're considerate of the fact that most people are not comfortable with something that simplistic. And so they read into it, especially the 6 who will project onto it that there's a hidden lurking danger. So thank you. And there is one question here. I noticed that you seem to use a system when explaining why some people have a different tritype than they identify with, which I've just explained. But the second part of the question is, what do you think are the best ways to type people? Well, actually, there are many things that you want to consider. And I have like 10 considerations. I have 15 and I have 25. And if you really factor in all of them, it lets you know that you're considering these variables. Like, what is their instinct? Is that influencing what type we think they are? What is their Myers-Briggs? Or what center are they in? Or what are lookalikes? There are many things that you can look at. And the facial expressions, the focus of attention, the talk style, all these things help distinguish between types that can look alike. Behavior is just a small part of it. And it's the first clues that you might have. But then you have to check again to see what I talked about at the very beginning, the idealized image, the core fear, and the defense strategy. Now, that doesn't negate the importance of the passion, the fixation, and the convictions. But what it does is gives you the qualities that are better at typing people, not working with the different ways that their passions, fixations, and convictions will show up. Yeah, this is a similar question, that they're confused by the different descriptions, especially those written by people that do not know about subtypes or tritypes. This is true because if someone's teaching the Enneagram without subtypes, then they don't understand the more primitive expression. And in fact, early in the Enneagram dissemination, subtypes didn't exist. So there were a whole group of people that came down through the Catholic pipeline that were not exposed to any of Naranjo's theories of these archetypes. I call them stereotypes, but he called them archetypes. And he found some of the 27, that means type and instinct combined, and what that creates. He was just kind of thinking about it. So in that first dissemination of the Enneagram, that also had the error of the lines of integration, disintegration, went around the world. And there are many people that have come through those communities, Christian and Catholic communities, that never got the subtypes. So there are new books even being written right now that don't include the subtypes. So they find it in their search if they love the Enneagram, but they'll describe the types differently. And actually, the reason people describe the types differently with Tritype is you get more subtlety of the type. So it's a more complete description of the type. So this person is making a very noteworthy comment, and why in 1996 we did the conference. It was the first original IEA conference. Before that, it was just a conference that David Daniels put together. And we decided to compare and contrast the different teachings. There were so many different teachings, and they were based on different disseminations of the Enneagram. So what this person is really addressing is that you have to consider who the person studied with that you're reading, and there are different disseminations, and there are 4 basic disseminations of the Enneagram. And that could be an event unto itself. Anything more you want to say, Spencer, before we go into questions?
That was actually very well wrapped up, honestly.
Okay. And now we'll take questions. Justine is.
Hey, so, Lord, I have had so many thoughts. I'm trying to get my my initial thread in my head. Well, first of all, I just want to say, taking the Tritype assessment, your assessment has been like really profound for me.
I'm glad.
Yeah, it really has been. And I mean, it amused me in many ways as well, because of course, it gave me the 6 and the 8, which I was like, yeah, I didn't want to be, linked to that so much. I was like kind of resistant against that. And then like going even deeper, I was absolutely certain though that I had to be self-pres, and then probably social, because one-to-one was definitely gonna be dead last, because I very much, didn't like the description of the sexual instinct in the 4,
Or yeah, when it's the over top aggressive.
right, and that was definitely not me, along with
They're
the 8,
usually the 4, 6, 8 though. But
right?
let me say one thing important is that
Mm,
if you have 4 in the tritype,
mm.
you can identify with sexual and not be sexual. So I would just, if you think you're self-pres, I would still be open to that. But go ahead.
Oh, no. I copped to it because
Oh, okay.
no, I did, because but I think I understand what I did. I think it's kind of like a mixture for me of definitely some trauma. And I did look back and kind of like thought, well, what were my initial kind of, that I can remember of myself, of how I was and how I wanted to be, and what was important to me, um, before a bunch of stuff happened in my life. And that actually did make it easier for me to see myself as the tribe type that I turned out to be. And it was resonant for me, when I looked at it through that lens. And I think a lot of what I did, honestly, I've never heard that described anywhere, but I feel like I definitely know for myself, it makes sense that the social is dead last. Um, but I honestly think, and the intimate and the self-pres are very close. So it's like 14, 15, 15, 14, kind of.
Yeah, that's important. That's why I did both ways of evaluating the instinct, because you might choose a card that
Mm,
you identify with the words, but do you in the sentences or vice versa? And so it's ultimately comparing those. Another one that is deeper than people realize. But yes, if it showed you were 1 point apart, it's very important
it is
because
close.
they're almost like a little amoebas, not amoebas,
Mm,
they're what? Chromosomes that are coming together.
and my feeling is that I direct a lot of the 468 intensity, which I definitely have. That's undeniable to me. But I direct it against myself, and I think that that's part of the trauma thing, to police myself, to contain myself. And part of that is the trauma, and part of it also is though like some healthy part of the 4 that knows that I have to sit with my feelings and not be reactive with everything that that comes up. And so that is a healthy part of me that knows that I have to sit and percolate. So anyway, it's
Yeah.
very nuanced, but I love what I'm saying is that I can it all fits with what came up with the test for me. So it's amazing like that, and it kind of reflects a lot of the points that you've been touching on. That some of it is growth, and some of it can be trauma, and all of these different things. So that, yeah.
And the 4 with the 4, 6, 8 tri-type in any order is stronger in voicing their opinions,
Mhm.
whereas the 4s that have softer tri-type, especially if they're social and an introvert,
Oh,
they will like not overtly say things, but it is the journey of the 4-6-8 in any order, in any tri-type, to take that immediate adrenaline and learn to slow it down. And it's really a lifelong journey because you're meant to alert others.
Yeah.
Problem.
So I can't not say, what my truth ends up being, but I have learned that I have to like stop a tick to find out what it really is before it just went,
Yeah, and we've heard it our
Okay,
whole
so well done.
lives. Like, Spencer, you're a 4-6-8.
Mhm.
How did you experience it as a child? That now you led with 8. Actually, with 8, it softens the 8 because the emotion and the 6. But with the 4, it strengthens the resolve to voice more. What did you notice, like in elementary school, that you would experience with other kids? Because now you were an ENFP, so you're very friendly, and the 6 in there. But when you came on too strong, and this tri-type comes on strong, the only one that comes on stronger is the 8-3-6.
Mm.
I mean, I definitely have overwhelmed a few people for sure. And during that time, also throwing in that I'm a male, right? Being emotionally expressive as a male. And keep in mind, this was in the 90s, right? So now if I had talked like I was in the 90s now, it probably would have gone over a little better. But, me talking to my, elementary, middle school, or even high school friends in an emotionally verbose way was very uncomfortable for them. They preferred I used other generalizing terms as opposed to like, hey, like it really upset me when because it got really heavy.
Yeah.
And people don't know what to do with heavy. It was as if they were trying to tread water, and I was like, here, hold this anvil. It was just way too much. Whereas I'm like backstroking in the ocean because I'm very comfortable being in that depth.
Well, I
So
mean, it's like your FI on top of everything else. You can't do anything but,
yes,
Yep.
yes.
And
And
sorry, let me add this and then you expand on it, Spencer. And also, he had a mother that was doing all this typologies and Enneagram. And I'd say, okay, sit down, we're going to talk feelings. I also was trying to make it so that he didn't shut down the way I did. But in that,
ugh,
I was having him use language that his friends were like, what?
what
Yeah.
is this?
yeah, no, it's just I think I kind of alluded to it when we first started talking about the too honest part.
Yes.
I was too direct. A lot of these two descriptors. It's very interesting inner conflict with the 4-6-8 because there's the feelings of not being enough, but being reflected that you're too much.
Yeah. Good.
So it's kind of like, oh, so I'm doing both wrong. Cool. That's good to know. So it was just I mean, for lack of better wording, intense. And I wasn't even meaning to. And I can flip on a dime because I'm actually a very friendly person. As my mom mentioned, the 4 and the 6 softened my 8. So I'm not this, ball buster, like I can be. And, honestly, in my humor, I am. That's how I care about you. Instead of hugging, I poke. And be like, oh, not you just being blah, 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 blah. They go, oh, and I can take that. You throw that my direction. I think that's hilarious. I'm like, oh, and you see me and you found a quippy way to do that. Great. Like here we are just kind of throwing our chests back and forth, but to someone who doesn't understand that's what I'm doing, it was me being mean. And I was like,
Lord.
mean? No, I'm the same person who helped you do that project. You didn't know what I had this 4th grade assignment where we had to know what our animal was. And a lot of kids didn't know how to determine what their animal was. And the same people who thought I was too much, I still went and helped them and was like, okay, well, think about this and blah, blah, blah. And I helped them figure out what their animal was. I always saw myself as caring and blah, 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 blah. But then at the same time, I can be too intense and too much. But it was really confusing. I just didn't understand that I would come into a room and take over before I even spoke. I just didn't understand that. And so
And
just
that was
energetic shoving around.
and that's why I asked on the questionnaire the animal you would choose, because if you chose a creature, that's why I said creature, so it could be mythical or an insect.
Mm,
But if people can choose more than one, that's intriguing too. But with the kids, when they were doing their animal assignment, I had already created this questionnaire and included animal. And if you chose a creature that's prey, you're not an 8, because the 8 can't identify with it. But if you look at the tri-type, you will see these softer creatures or playful or the another aspect of the personality. Like, I like dragons and tigers. I put them on jackets. It's like I'm not choosing bunny rabbits or squirrels. So that's the other thing. Type will come in and play into that. But Spencer could always, from the time he was a very little boy, stop and see what another child needed when they were scared, when they were emotional. It didn't faze him in the least. And he'd stop what he was doing and pay attention to them. So the kid that was running around and being intense was also the one that would track something and change. So when you're a 4, you would just come off unexpectedly strong in a way that could be uncomfortable to people, because they would see you as kind of the introvert, the quiet person, the mysterious person, and then suddenly you're asserting something that's important with your authenticity. And then the sexual 4 in particular, but all 4s can do it, suddenly abruptly asserting. And it shows the most with the 468 or 486. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question, Sarah. I remember you from before, Sarah.
Oh yeah, I remember you guys.
If I remember correctly, your question mark used to be a 1.
What?
You
No.
have a question mark now?
No, it is just a question mark.
Oh, I just thought it said 1 the whole. Okay.
No, it did not say 1.
Oh, okay.
Actually, I do have a question about 1.
Your gut center. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm like, somehow I don't really know the difference between 648 and 641.
Mm.
So you're trying to determine that?
Yeah. I really have the intensity of the 648.
Well, 641s are intense too. Don't underestimate that. And because if you're the INTP, there's a lot of need for original, creative, single-minded in your own
That's definitely true. That's me.
perspective. So we'll see what Spencer says, but I always look at the types separately to consider what it might be. And then what happens with the merge, what's canceled out more, or seems to be canceled out. It's never canceled out. Minimized is a better word. And then what's amplified. And
Okay.
it's very different between the 648 and the 641. Like Spencer, what have you noticed with people with the two different?
I mean, honestly, the word that I would jump to is appropriateness.
Okay.
The reason that I don't question at all that I have 8 versus 1 is I'm a t-shirt wearing, not always fully shaven. I'm sometimes I'm late to my sessions. It's like, it's just one of those things where 1's like really like the appropriateness, like what I should be doing in this moment. There's like a should element that's very powerful.
Yeah, I think my shoulds are more 6-ish. Because my shoulds are attachment oriented, like the 6. I don't really feel shoulds otherwise.
Right. And honestly, when I misread your question mark earlier on, I said 1, your reaction almost feels like you kind of connect to 8 more because you were so surprised.
Yeah.
So I think instinctually and that response felt even more 8 than 1 to me. Because there's an abruptness to 8. We speak with our chest, as I say.
Yeah.
And so there's like what I think rules exist because, we don't want complete chaos, but at the same time, I'm more of a spirit of the law person.
Yeah, like why do
What
rules exist, but at the same time they really need to exist.
Right. And ones are more letter of the law.
Yeah.
If I see a
And
sign that says don't walk on the lawn, I'm going to kind of investigate that further. Why? Because just if there's like some sort of animal that's like, trying to create a habitat and you're like, don't walk in this area, boom, I will stay away from that. I get it. Like once I understand why the rule exists, I will follow it. If I appreciate, respect, and understand the rule, I'll follow. But if I think the rule is stupid, if I think it's making the rule for the sake of having rules, I'll have this almost desire to buck the rule out of just sheer principle.
Be like, why does that rule exist? It's stupid.
Right. So I think the appropriateness is the big one, because I don't really like, I almost kind of like my inappropriateness.
Me too.
So that almost kind of every way that you've been responding throughout this, I would kind of say that pretty clear in my opinion, but that's one. But obviously I want to check in with my mom as well. But that for me, that's the big identifier, because I never really consider whether I'm being appropriate. It's brought to my attention that, I'm more this or more that. And I'm like, oh, that didn't even occur to me, so that's the best way I can really explain it. That's usually where my attention goes.
Oh, yeah.
To mention the defense strategies, of course, but we already covered that. That's why I didn't.
Yeah, it's like, is your additional strategy denial or reaction formation? And with reaction formation, you feel the same visceral energy with the way you responded or reacted a moment ago with the 1. Is the 1 starts to feel the inappropriateness of what they're about to say, and they cut it off. So they start to say it, and then there's like a movement of the jaw where it's trying to stop saying the thing that would be inappropriate, wrong, or bad to do. That a good person does not do that. So you didn't have anything that stopped you. It just went straight up. And that's more an indication of triple adrenaline, which the force.
Triple adrenaline?
Yeah, it's the adrenaline type of each center.
Yeah, you're right. Oh my God, that sounds right. Yep, I'm at least double adrenaline.
Yeah. So it's a quick response. Not that anyone that's had a life where they had to be defensive and lived on eggshells, they're going to be reactive too.
I've gone through a lot of trauma through my life, so I question a whole lot. Well, yeah, I'm obviously a 6. You see my micro expressions.
Yeah. I sure do.
Yeah.
It's a great example of the
eyebrows.
The whole, and the forehead too. But yours is particularly the eyes and the eyebrows.
Oh man.
It's a great indication of having 6 in a tritype.
I'm like, everybody who has dealt with me has known these things, like my obvious defense mechanisms as a 6.
So Spencer's absolutely right. If you have 1 in the tritype, there's this need to be appropriate, even if you're not feeling appropriate. And with the 4 and 6, it's always hard because you're going to be reactive, period.
Yeah.
And then you have to see what the gut type is, how it's influencing what you will or won't do.
Yeah.
Because the type is what we think or need to know. And the heart type is the kind of the way in which we need to portray ourselves to be safe. So
Yeah.
each center is trying to give us safety, but the one feels safe if they're more socially appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not me.
Yeah, and the 8, that's not what brings safety. What brings safety is to be truthful,
Yeah.
your truth. And it's immediate, visceral, that you might think, whoops, like for me, when I've said things that were inappropriate, I've
Yeah.
already said it, especially as where I could zip it.
I'm just like, I can't believe I said that. Why did I just say I can't believe I said that?
It's so fast. Yeah. And also, I would also, for anyone debating, I would also analyze your relationship with anger.
Oh my God.
There tends to be an anger shame with one. Not to say that I haven't been like, crap, I just did that with my anger as I reflect, but typically with one, anger is viewed negatively. Whereas for 8, anger is like, this is me being real with you. Like there's not that filter. It again feeds into the appropriateness, but many ones I run into, it depends where you are on, the growth in that area, but anger feels wrong because it's out of control. It's how it feels typically. And the one's desire to be composed and in control directly conflicts with that.
And the 9,
Let me add something to what he's saying, because it's really important. The 1 has a fear they'll go into rage, uncontrollable rage. Whereas the 8 could go to uncontrollable rage, but there isn't a fear around it. It's like we actually just show little irritations and anger. We're kind of discharging anger all the time. Little here, little there, mad at the computer, like, why are you stopping?
yeah.
What the? Yeah.
Who moved that table?
Sometimes I try not to be angry, but that's more the 6.
It's like, in a way, triple blame when you have 4, 6, and 8. You're going to blame someone.
Yeah.
Otherwise, but the 4, 6, 1, there's this immediate change in the tritype where now what the types share in common is a need for control. The 6 needs control to feel safe. The 1 needs control to be a good example of what's appropriate. And the 4 needs control so they have a more constant identity. So it shifts to someone acting more in control.
I think with the 4, it's more controlling to avoid inadequacy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because 4, 6, and 8, it's triple weakness in a way.
Yeah, that's definitely, yeah.
If you don't, because being inadequate is really being weak.
I'm afraid of being inadequate and afraid of feeling weak.
And the 6 has the fear of being helpless.
Oh my God, I have all 3 of those.
And the 8 has the fear of being disempowered. Give me a break.
Yep. Sounds just like me.
You're going to seize it quickly if you can.
Abandonment's typically a pretty heavy word too.
Oh my God, I'm very afraid of abandonment.
So
one of my worst fears.
So
yeah, that's 6 and 4 coming together.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we move on? Thank you. Cassie? Yes.
So I'm Cassie, this is Sarah, and I'm a 628, and Sarah is a 649.
Or 694, maybe.
Yeah, sorry. And so what we're kind of interested is, we don't hear a lot about how to resolve conflict between types. So for
like, I hate conflicts. We're best friends. I hate conflicts. And I'm always like overwhelmed. Like, I'm very sensitive and empathic, and like I can pick up on a lot of nuances like that people are putting out. And she's like, whoosh. And then I'm like,
to do that. She's meant to be the immediate hero.
I'm meant to be. Did you hear that? I'm
yeah, she takes care of me a lot. Like, there's like a vibe where she's protective, but like if she sees that there's a problem between us, it's like,
I want to take care of
this
it
out. And I'm like,
yeah. And that's the difference between 9 and 8. The 9 has a belief, and we need someone that'll do this, that many things will work themselves out.
Mm,
But if you have 8 as your gut type, you don't trust it's going to be worked out. And you can't tolerate the adrenaline running through your body. So you assert working it out. Like the 8 is just a 9 that can't tolerate waiting until things come to resolution. So you assert for
Mhm.
resolution. Or like when I'd say to my kids, okay, sit down, we're going to talk feelings. And I had them face each other. And I had these 2 chairs that would move.
Oh
And
my God.
then the sooner we got to the resolution, then we could all have fun again.
Mm.
So the 8 asserts for it. It's because the 8 cares about the relationship or the situation. Otherwise, there's just too much adrenaline to wait. Whereas the 9 could wait and never address it and just hope it gets easier over time. It fades away like a tide going out. Whereas the 8 is going to splash to
Yeah.
where things land. And we need both. But yes,
And
that
a lot of times to me, it'll be like, oh, this isn't a big deal. Like we could just
Not talk about it.
have it be calm. Like it's like tomorrow we won't be thinking about this because it wasn't a big deal. And like, and it doesn't feel like a roller coaster then. It just feels like we can just, you know, get on to the laughing, having a good time right now because that wasn't.
Can you cue
It
in
wasn't-
on her eyebrows? Let's see if she's making the right.
Am I doing my 6 expression?
and you know, the truth is that when you have 2 in the tri-type, you also want immediate resolution, which is why that's the hero tri-type right there. I wanted to show you guys
Hero.
another important
Hero.
thing.
I-
Is
and-
that I teach this in the more advanced.
Yeah.
These are all the tri-types that mathematically end up in the quadrant off of 9. And then these are the tri-types that all come off of 6. And these are the tri-types that come off of 3. And as a result, if we look at your tri-type of the 6 to 8, well, it's over there as the rescuer under the 6 reactive, the opposing energy, whereas the 4, 6, 9 is not in that.
Is that the seeker?
I'm
Well,
the
it's
seeker.
higher up, it's closer, whereas the 6 to 8 is out further and down. The 4, 6, 9 tri-type in any order is higher up. And
Yeah,
as
she always says she's better than me. Yeah, that's
No, I don't.
it's closer to the primary type of 3, 6, 9. The only variable is 3 moving to 4. But the 6 to 8 has 2 hexad types, 2 and 8, only one adapting type that is modifying. And we need both, whereas you have 2 adapting types. And you really don't realize it, but if you're friends, you're depending on each other to do that opposite thing. It's only when you're in a conflict or a difference of opinion that it seems problematic, but you're both right. For many years, I was married to Spencer's dad, a 9, and I'd always say to him, we just need to deal with this faster. And then there won't be all these loose ends and these problems. And he said, well, what if you learn that if we just take time, some of it will work itself out and we don't need to apply energy. And what we discovered is we were both right. So he learned to react faster and I learned to slow down. But the instinct is still there to follow the type and the structure of each type is meant to exist. Each type, each tri-type is really needed for society and culture to work.
So do you do more videos or more, you know, we learn a lot from you about the types and the tri-types, but what, again, it's part about conflict resolution, you know, in relationships in general, you know, spouses, right? And, you know, mothers and fathers, I mean, mothers and children, right?
Absolutely.
Do you do more things on conflict resolution?
that I have in free videos, no, but I certainly could, Spencer and I could do it just on conflict resolution. That would be good because,
It's something I've played with, to be honest.
yeah, and I've worked with it. I did it professionally before I knew the Enneagram, and I didn't know what types people were, but I had other training, micro expressions, MBTI, body language, just many other things. But once I learned the Enneagram, it was, oh, now I have a way to explain it to people where no one's wrong, that literally it's tracking different data. And I did a lot of conflict resolution, knowing the Enneagram as well. And I've given the example where there were 3 ones that were in terrible conflict working on the same project and trying to help ones see that the other ones weren't wrong, that they were just tracking something else that was significant, was important too. There you are. So I was giving the example with conflict resolution where it was on a very important project that was going to influence people across the country. And there were 3 ones assigned to the team that were supposed to roll out this perspective and what was needed or important. And they were just loggerheads. They just couldn't be wrong because they thought the other person, the other ones, the other 2 people were not tending to what was of the utmost importance, what was critical, what was needed, what was responsible and should be done. So the Enneagram gave me a tool for helping them see that they all were focused on what was right and what should be done. But in their case, they happened to be 3 different instincts. So I could help them see how together they could create a more complete whole and a project that would meet more issues. And it was amazing how they could then integrate it. I didn't have that before the Enneagram. I could say it was a result of introversion, extroversion, or their different types, or their body language, or their micro expressions, or any of the typologies I used. But yes, looking at the defense strategies, or what Spencer shared earlier, working with couples. And yeah, I've worked with families where the whole family's in chaos, and you help them understand each other. And it's just miraculous, actually, because you depersonalize what feels so personal. And it's not, these are defense strategies operating that we're unaware of. And that's how Tritype helps, because you get more nuances. And why the 628, 268, 862 is the most heroic Tritype. Now, the 638 will go into special forces and be like a machine, but it's different because they're planning to be a hero. Whereas the 628 just often is a hero in difficult circumstances because they want to help people. Because the 6 becomes counterphobic and the 6 identifies with the underdog. The 2 has aligned to 8 and wants to be a part of people's lives and make a difference. And the 8 has aligned to 2 and they want to protect the underdog. So those 3 together, and you're not going to change being immediate. You can just begin to see that. And the way the conflict will always show up, if someone has 6 and 4s and 9, is they're going to want to kind of see how it's going. Even leading with, with 6, it's still like, wait a minute, I don't want to act too quickly. So if there's 9 in there, there'll be a hesitation that's longer. And bottom line, it's kind of like Spencer's dad saying, well, wait, we don't need to do that fast. And he was right. And a lot of things did resolve themselves. But the things that were never resolved, I would be the one pushing for addressing it, or at least looking at it. And once we understood that being a 9 versus an 8 was huge. But then our Tritypes were different too. He's a 9-5-3. I was an 8-7-4. I wasn't going to follow any like traditional structure. I was going to be doing things on the fly. And he was going to want to think about it more thoroughly and completely. And he was also an INTJ and I'm an ENTP. So that's also enough different in important ways. But the conflict would be about this urgency. And when you have people together that both have a type that has the urgency, and that would be 8, 6, and 4, they're all have the urgency, then the person has the greater urgency in the dynamic is the one that's pushing. But in another dynamic, someone might have 2 urgent types, and suddenly the more urgent type is less. And that's why conflict management changes with Tritypes, because we have to look at how many of the primary types someone has, how many of the hexad, how that influences the way conflict will play out. And we're going to have predictable ways that we're going to see things and be in conflict with every other type and Tritype, but it gives a formula for saying, oh, right, they're meant to do that. It's not personal. And if the parent and the child or the friends or the coworkers or the spouses or partners, they see that, it's much easier if they understand why. So yes, we definitely should do that where it's just on conflict, because it's amazing at how it can be neutralized. I've even had, like, quite commonly 2 6s, and they might even have the same heart type, but 2 different gut types. And then that you think, well, wait, they can't be that different. They have 2 types in common, but the gut type is going to be, are you going to not move, or are you going to move too quickly, or are you going to try and get it right when you move? And then just understanding that can help heal a couple's projections onto each other. I'm sure you've seen that too, Spencer, working with people, because you use the Enneagram, you've never not used it.
Yeah, it's all I've known. And the thing for you two, I would really pay attention to actually the number you have in common.
6.
So 6, yeah, 6s make decisions based on the negative outcome they're trying to avoid. So when you pair the 2 and the 8, you pair the 4 and the 9, there's something that you're both trying to avoid due to your loyalty to each other. Right? My guess is the 2-8 combo is trying to avoid some sort of breakage in the relationship. We need to protect this relationship. We need to protect the bond. We have to keep us connected and united. If we let this go, imagine all the things that could happen between now and whenever you let us talk
That's
about
me.
this damn thing.
Absolutely her.
Yeah. And, the whole world could burn by the time we get there. And an analogy I like to use is like a UFC reference. Don't leave it to the judges. Like, who knows how they're going to interpret this? I want to get a knockout, a submission. Like let's get the result that we're going for. Whereas the 4 and the 9, that could be very the overwhelm and the emotional chaos of that all could really be very damaging to the relationship. And if we talk about this too soon, we could really hurt each other. Right. And so it's the desire to protect and be loyal to the relationship, but not like, it's like, hey, the house is still on fire. No one's inside. You don't need to run in right now, but while the 2-8's like, our relationship is inside, so it's so you're both actually trying to protect each other. It just doesn't look like it from the other angle.
Yeah, and we have different instincts too. And I don't know how much that comes into play. But I'm a very strong self-pres, and she's a very strong sexual.
Oh, so that's gonna
That was a good look. I think that we are.
So that just explains a lot.
I think that we're very good candidates for your next panel, don't you?
Yes. Yes. I'm like, oh, we should do a panel.
When you say
Spencer.
that, yeah.
Yeah, no. Because instincts are what's triggering the whole.
Yeah,
dependent-
yeah. Instinct is your sense of security, and tri-type is how you get it. So yeah, 628 that's intimate is like, if it's late at night, she's like, let's sleep on this because energy depletion is happening and we could not show up as our best selves and this could really hurt. And it's like, who could sleep at a time like this? We're not playing. So it's just like totally coming from very different secure points. But again, if during times of conflict, you guys can really remember, hey, what we both have is 6. We're both trying to be loyal to each other. We're both trying to avoid some negative outcome. And if we can remember that the other person's trying to do the same thing, they're just coming at it from a different perspective, then maybe we can meet somewhere in the middle. Like, okay, if we don't do this now, then when? Right? Like some sort of clarity, because man, the two having to wait is just
Yeah, and the self-press, like you want
I just want to rip out my hair just
like,
thinking about that.
Yeah, I'm like
self-press.
tired when I'm anything, and you want to
Yeah. I haven't eaten yet. I'm tired. Like, I'm not going to be my best self to you. And like, I don't want this. Like, I don't want to.
And the self-press 6 does not want to do it then. They want to wait. And if they're 6 and 9, 4, 6, 9 is in many ways the most inhibited combination, where you don't want anything that will be so out of control that you can't pull it back in. And people say, wait, but they're 6 and 4. Yeah, but that 9 changes so.
The number changes.
And you have to look at the self-pres 6, the self-pres 4, and the self-pres 9.
Right.
Or conversely, the sexual 6, the sexual 2, and the sexual 8. And that was pretty revolutionary in my first research when I was doing this. I did it a number of ways, but it also included these qualitative interviews. And it became so clear immediately with people that it was the instinct that was more dominant than type, that force. Whereas at the time, this is going back to early 1990s, but then I did the more formal research in 1994, that it was not taught that way. It was taught that the instinct was kind of something in addition, and you could use it to work with your passion. It wasn't associated with your fixation. It wasn't associated with your conviction. It was thought of as really secondary to type. And then it turned out it was the opposite. And I had this perfect, what I thought was elegant expression where you could just stack your instinct, stack your type, and then you'd have a type and an instinct for each. And that is true on a higher level. But what I found is that you have to go with the instinct because it's so much more dominant than the type. So conflicts will first and foremost be based on the instinct. And what you feel you will die if you don't have. And then how we're going to go about it is based on the tri-type, and in particular, the core type is the CEO. Would you say it differently, Spence?
No, I thought that was very well worded.
Okay.
Good job, Spence. Good job.
Yeah, we've been learning so much. When we learned we were both 6s, it was like, why are we so different? And then getting the tri-type and the instincts was like, okay, there's a lot to learn here. That makes a lot more sense. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you for the work that you're doing. It's really wonderful.
Yeah, and I tell you, it's wonderful to do it with my son because nobody knows this better than he does. It's like he says things, yeah, that's him. I learn whenever he starts talking, because being an 8, he's not just using my language, it's his own version of it. Plus, he's fluent, as he said. He's probably more fluent in type and tri-type and instinct and all these typologies because he never didn't know them. The time he was a toddler, and he could be cognizant of why he was different from another child. I was telling him, whether he understood or not, became more clear over time. But, I could teach him, look in their eyes, Spencer. If a little child is doing this, it means they're different from you. But even when he was a little baby and I was holding him, if someone said, "Oh, hey, Catherine, how are you doing?" and they put their hand on my shoulder, he'd go, like a little 8-month-old, like, "No, don't touch her."
Don't touch me.
And it was the possessive part of sexual aid, like, wait, she's mine. Don't threaten my connection. It's also the age when there's a developmental change where you see yourself as separate and you want to make sure you still have the connection to whomever you're attached to. And so that's what he's doing, but he's doing it like an 8. Yeah. Take your fingers off my mom.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's our pleasure.
Thank you all for your participation. We do this quarterly, so, but the questions really help because we will address whatever you guys bring up, as you noticed with the questions today.
Mhm.
All right. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.